This is the devotion for July 16th, Thursday. I'm Elizabeth Liggett, chaplain with St. John's United Hospice. The first church I served as a pastor was a small congregation in a tiny village in Nebraska. Our church building featured a bell tower, and I soon discovered that sounding that bell was an important part of life in that congregation. The bell was rung every Sunday about 5 or 10 minutes before worship. I suppose it was to call people to worship. At the conclusion of a funeral, as a casket and family and congregation emerged from the church, the bell would toll, which I always found to be very poignant. And very importantly, whenever a congregation death occurred, a council member would go over and toll the bell. One toll for each year of the deceased's age. It was always a somber sound, but particularly so when there were just a handful of tolls, which signified a very short life. I suppose in earlier years, such tolling was an important means of communication. These days, information travels electronically at breakneck speed, and you don't really need physical bells tolling or ringing. I don't know if that little church still practices bell ringing and bell tolling. I hope it does. Even though practically it's not necessary, I think it's a wonderful tradition and practice. Some churches go a step further and have carillons. A carillon dates back to the 16th century Europe. It's a set of tuned bronze bells hanging high in a steeple or tower. Music tones are produced by pressing on rows of wood batons and pedals that swing the clappers against the bells. 2 congregations I served had carillons, or miraculously, they had a public sound system that could play recorded carillon bell music. My bet is that most carillon bells in modern churches are of the pre-recorded type, although in my research, I heard of 4 churches in Cleveland, Ohio, all of which have authentic carillon instruments, which all featured carillon concerts this spring to boost the public spirit in light of COVID-19 and the inability to gather and worship. I always wondered what the neighbors think of church carillon bells playing. Now, I am a neighbor. Last winter, we moved to a home that's just a stone's throw away from St. Pius Catholic Church. And their carillon plays, as far as I've been able to figure, at the strike of noon, 3 p.m., and 6 p.m. It's now just a little after noon. I can't speak for other neighbors, but my husband and I love it. When we're outside and we can hear it, we often pause in our conversation. We usually are familiar with most of the hymns that are played, and we often sing or hum along. I couldn't find out what the original purpose was of church bells and carillons, but for me, it's a pause in the day. It's a calling back, whether calling to the church for worship or calling back to an awareness of the Holy One. It reminds me in the midst of our everyday lives that there is something beyond us, something bigger than us, a God whose presence hovers around and blankets us with grace. I, for one, am grateful for that reminder, for that opportunity to pause, for that invitation to be aware of God, for that invitation to prayer.